Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I start in the name of Allah, the most merciful and the all-merciful. I have previously explained how we can derive the four principles of quantum relativity from the duality of time theory that is based on the single monad model of the cosmos. And yes, I mean it, quantum relativity or quantum gravity, because based on this new innovative model of time and creation, not only the three principles of special and general relativity can be derived, but a fourth new principle is needed to reveal the discrete symmetry of space, and therefore the geometry becomes granular or quantized, or to be more accurate, it becomes fractal and also genuinely complex. So in the previous video, I tried to explain this extremely eccentric and complex model of creation. But although I tried to be brief, that video became very long and not many people were able to watch it or watch all of it, which is about 3 hours. So many of my friends have asked me to make a new shorter video that outline the main points in this single monad model and duality of time theory and how it can be used to derive the principles of quantum relativity. So I will try in this new presentation to show the main points of this model and that the new complex time geometry will really, no doubt, cause a paradigm shift in our understanding of creation or the cosmos and its both corporeal and incorporeal structures, because the duality of time provide a profound understanding of time and also space that may solve many, if not all, of the major fundamental problems in physics and cosmology, as well as philosophy and even pure mathematics, because it affects the very structure of geometry, and therefore the 5 axioms of Euclid need to be revised, because now the geometry has become genuinely complex and granular. So let's summarize the mentioned video and only mention the main points and show, inshallah, very clearly how this model is even not only the theory of everything, because it not only unites the forces of nature into one single description, but it also unites the physical world with the metaphysical world. So let's start and be very concise as much as possible. The single monad model of the cosmos was developed by myself between the years 1999 and 2004, based on the PhD thesis that I have presented at the University of Exeter with the title "The Concept of Time in Ibn al-Arabi's Cosmology and Its Implications on Modern Physics." But in reality, my work on this subject started in early 1990s, although was only in the form of extracurricular readings of el-arabi's books while I was studying at the University of Cambridge. In very short words, this model postulates that everything in the world, including matter and also abstract things like the mind, the heart, or the souls, and even other creatures, not only the humans, for example, the jinns and the angels. So everything in the cosmos is perpetually being recreated at every instance of our normal time that we encounter. And this creation or recreation is happening by one single entity called the single monad, which is the only thing that can be described as having real existence, while everything else is only becoming in time. So coming into being only for one instance and then vanishing into the past. So this model, therefore, is based on the concepts of the greatest master Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi, otherwise also known as the theory of oneness of being or the unity of being, which is sometimes very badly reduced into a philosophical form known as pantheism or panentheism. Actually, also it was advocated by Spinoza and greatly favored by Einstein himself. Although it has a complex structure of its own, the single monad can be thought of as one point of space, not in space, but it's actually the point that is creating space itself and whatever it contains of elementary particles. However, the monad is actually internally also being recreated or created by another element, what Ibn Arabi calls the greatest element, which is creating the single monad in 6 days and manifesting in the sevens. So in total, we have 7 dimensions of time, 6 inner levels and 1 external. And we only view the outside or the external after the creation happens. And that's why we see the word continuous, whereas in reality it's being recreated one point at a time. So this model, therefore, explains how the dimensions themselves being created from one point and then 2 points making one line, and then 2 lines making a plane, and then the planes making the 3 dimensions or 6 directions. So the creations in 6 days is actually the creations of the 6 dimensions or directions. So in a way, this is actually a bit more like the string theory, but here it's not only we suppose that strings exist in space or exist in some theoretical space of some dimensions. However, here the strings themselves are being recreated in the dimensions, within the dimensions of the springs are being recreated in the inner levels of time before they manifest in the outer level. And here is the strength of this model. It actually goes beyond the physical world by explaining how the very dimensions of geometry are being created. And here is where the geometry becomes granular. But if we suppose the geometry is always coexisting, then it is continuous. So we only view it in the outer level. That's why we view it as continuous. But in the reality of time, it's being created one point at a time. So for this reason, I have developed the duality of time theory, which I have started working on a few years ago, maybe in 2017. And this theory is the practical application of the single monad model. And I was greatly surprised to see that the principles of relativity are directly derived from this theory, and not only it agrees with them, but it actually shows why these principles are true. particularly the constancy and invariance of the speed of light, which is so far considered as a principle that is just supposed to be true. But here in the duality of time and the single monad model, we show how and why the speed of light is constant in all reference frames. So I can quickly summarize this duality of time postulate by saying that at every instance of our outward normal level of time that we encounter, space and matter are perpetually being recreated in one chronological sequence, which forms the inner levels of time that are also nested inside each lower dimension of space. Therefore, this postulate is based on what I call the recreation principle, which is what I have just explained in the previous sections, that the single monad is always recreating everything in the inner levels of time. So therefore, this inner and outer time makes the time genuinely complex. And actually, we no more have space-time, but we have time, inner time and outer time, or complex time. And this is genuinely complex because it's not only we suppose that the outer time is imaginary, as Stephen Hawking have tried to apply this and had built on it some cosmological model. So he was not successful because he was trying to suppose that the time is imaginary with relation to space that is different from time. In my case here, the time is genuinely imaginary because the space itself is the inner, which is the real dimensions of time. So it's no more space-time, but time, or complex time. In the real levels of time, space is created, or the dimensions of space are created, and they are manifested in the outer level. So on the outer levels that we normally encounter, space appears to be continuous, and that's why general relativity is the best theory of the cosmology of the cosmos so far we have. However, this duality of time now explains the formation of the dimensions, and only on this level the dimensions or the geometry becomes quantized. Therefore, because of the recreation that is always taking place, there is actually no real motion, which means that there is no transmutation because there is no continuity. But we have only outward changes, which makes the illusion of motion. Just like what you see now in front of you on computer screens or maybe mobile screens that you are watching. So you see various images that appear to be moving on the screen, but in reality nothing is moving. What you have in reality is only still images or static frames that reappear always in different states or different forms, which cause the illusion of motion. So in reality, we have only two states of motion, or two states of existence, either existence or non-existence. So existence is vacuum and non-existence is void. So the vacuum is being made by the single monad as a background geometry, and its combination with the void points makes intermediary states of all elementary particles. So in reality, we don't have, we have only one field that is the vacuum, and then the temporal combination of the points of vacuum with the void, which is the recreation, these temporal combinations cause various secondary fields from which we get the various atomic particles like the electrons and the quarks and other things. So this model really goes beyond the physical structures, the physical geometry, into the metaphysical geometry and shows how the geometry itself is being recreated from one vacuum, and everything in the world is different states or excited states of this vacuum. So first we have two distinct states of vacuum and void, and then their combination makes four extreme states, which are actually the same classical elements that are known in almost all ancient civilizations, particularly by the Babylonians and Sumerians. So these four states are nothing but the four forms of matter which now come to know, which are normal matter and also antimatter, as well as dark matter and also dark energy. So here things becomes a little bit complicated, but actually they all come together to explain, for example, why we have this matter-antimatter asymmetry, and then where is the supersymmetry. And actually I have revealed that we have even two more levels of symmetry, which I have explained in this ultimate symmetry book, which I have written after the duality of time. And now I'm even working on a more advanced concept, which is temporal numbers, by showing how this fundamental idea actually change or alters the very dimensions of geometry, and therefore the pure mathematics, which is always built on geometry. And therefore we have to really reconsider the 5 axioms of Euclid, as I will maybe explain in some new sections. So after publishing the single monad model book in 2005, and then in 2007, and also later I made a new version of it in 2014, then I published the Duality of Time book in 2017 and also 2018. And then after that, the third volume, which is the Ultimate Symmetry, which explains how the space-time or time-time is actually genuinely fractal and complex. And I also published some other books which I have tried in them to simplify this view, including, for example, the chest of time, as well as dot or the duality of time and its implications for theory of relativity and quantum mechanics. So I showed in these books that almost all of the major fundamental problems in physics and cosmology can be really solved easily based on this new model. For example, the non-locality problem is very easily solved, or actually it disappears, because here we don't have, as I just explained, we don't have continuous motion, but we have recreation, and therefore at certain conditions of entanglement, as a result of the recreation, the effect and the cause can be widely separated without any restriction, because it's only the result is only recreated. It can be recreated anywhere in space, not only locally as normally what happens. So this same, for example, the same idea also explains the problem of homogeneity or the horizon problem, because it clearly shows that the dimensions are being refreshed, and therefore no matter how big is the universe, the states, all the states are being synchronized internally before they appear on the outer level. And actually, I have explained, but this requires more description and more analysis, that almost all of the fundamental problems in physics can be really solved, or even they simply cease to exist, including, for example, the arrow of time and why entropy is always increasing, as well as the problem of vacuum catastrophe or the cosmological constant problems, as well as supersymmetry and matter-antimatter asymmetries that I have just mentioned. And also, this model gives a straightforward process of how matter or mass is generated from the combination of pure points of geometry, as well as the principles of relativity, including, for example, the constancy and invariance of the speed of light that I will maybe explain in the coming slides. So, because of this new complex time structure, the theory of relativity becomes a direct consequence of the duality of time theory. And actually, some sort of this study has been already done even by Minkowski and Poincaré at the beginning of the theory of relativity, but at that time there were no real reasons why we should consider space and time to be hyperbolic, or to be complex, and time to be imaginary. But as I said previously, this model gives a genuine meaning for the imaginary time, and therefore complex time. And no more we have space time, but we have complex time, or time, or inner time and outer time. Therefore, because time has become complex, it's now a straightforward derivation of all the principles of relativity. Most of all is why the speed of light is constant in all directions or in all frames. And this is simply because the creation is happening always at the speed of light, which are the dimensions of space, and physical motion is happening in the imaginary time. So these two, real and imaginary, are always orthogonal, and therefore our motion, our physical motion, has no effect whatsoever on the inner creation. Just like, for example, here on the screens that you see in front of you, my motion, or whatever object is moving on the screen, is moving in a different plane, completely different from the actual motion of the creation of the screen itself, or the refresh rate of the creation. So in reality, the speed of light is the refresh rate of creation, because now it's no more space over time, but it is time over time, and therefore it has become unitless constant, from which all other constant will follow. And therefore this is really a real breakthrough. And you know that all the great physicists have hoped that this would be achieved one day, and now here we have it. The speed of light is now the very dimensions of geometry. The fractal dimensions of geometry are actually the normalized value of the speed of light corresponds to the fractal geometry, dimensions of geometry. And therefore now we understand why it's always constant, because it's the dimensions themselves that we are living in. And no matter how we try to move, we are always moving in the orthogonal direction, and therefore our motion, physical motion, has no effect on the creation itself. Of course, the other laws of relativity, like for example the Lorentz factor and the proper time, also follow directly from this complex time representation. And actually now there is no more any difference between inertial and non-inertial frames, because as I showed, in reality there is no real motion, and therefore the outward velocity is always zero. The real value of it is always zero. It's only we are making approximations of the discrete changes. So we are approximating the discrete symmetry into the continuous symmetry by supposing that the geometry is always coexisting, and here we get to the general relativity. But when we understand the structure of geometry, the discrete structure, we get into quantum relativity. So now actually we have four principles. We have the constancy and invariance of the speed of light. We have the symmetry of physical laws at inertial frames or for inertial frames, and then the equivalence principle for non-inertial frames. But now these two principles have now united because the real velocity is always zero, although we still can distinguish between the two different cases by the adding of the kinetic or the addition of the force or the kinetic energy, the change of the kinetic energy. And therefore here actually we can now deduce or derive the equivalence principle from the complex time equations, and not only as Einstein did, where he got this principle by induction without any theoretical proof. In addition to that, the derivation of the famous equation, which is the mass energy equation, is also possible, but now we don't want to get into complicated mathematics, although actually it's much simplified by this representation. So if you want to see how this can be derived, please refer to my previous video that is more detailed. And also I will give you the link for the main paper or main book, which you can download from my website that is called the singlemonad.com or the smonad.com.